players in Major League Baseball. Some of the things you and I discussed, they all had other jobs off season. Most of them were not illiterate necessarily at all, but didn't have extensive educations. They were used to very rough jobs. You'd mentioned coal mining and things like that. Let's get into some of this information. Some of the things we talked about, the fact that if Negro players were to enter Major League Baseball, that would mean that some of the white players would lose their jobs. There's so much. Harry, I need to have you talk about some of this stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah, that was really the case. After there was so much animosity from the blacks being moved to the major league level, that a lot of the white players felt like they were going to lose their job. And keep in mind, as a whole, Major League Baseball was not overly educated. Yes, there were some very intelligent people and people with college degrees and so forth. But overall, a lot of these guys came from farms throughout the Midwest and coal mines and stuff like that in the Appalachians and so forth. And they would lose that income and they would lose their job if a black player got on the team, because he had to take somebody's spot, and there was nobody's spot to take but another white player. So that created a lot of animosity and a lot of prejudice on a lot of the guys that came into the league. And like you said a little bit earlier, that yes, the DiMaggios and the Ted Williams and stuff like that, the really true icons of baseball, those guys had endorsements and so forth. But your average ball player, all the way up into the 60s and going into the 70s, they had other jobs in the off season, and so this was an important income for them and their family.
Mm-hmm. Was Jackie Robinson the very first pro black ball player?
No, and that's one of the things that a lot of people, when they went to the movie, it came out of, and they thought that Jackie Robinson was the first black ball player, and that's not really the case. The Society for American Baseball Research, they suggest that William White was actually the first professional black player, and in 1879, and he actually had been a slave, of all things. So, and he was with the Providence Grays of the National League. But the racial barrier was really set against a fellow named Moses Fleetwood Walker. Him and his brother, they played for the Toledo Blue Stockings, and it was a professional major league team at the time. But in 1884, that's when they had the discrimination and said no more blacks, and they closed the door to blacks. And the interesting part about this is that there is no blacks until Jackie Robinson in 1947. So we go from 1884 all the way up to 1947. So we've got 63 years where there's not blacks in baseball. Now, there's no formal agreement. There is no formal agreement banning blacks. It's just a handshake amongst the owners. Consequently, in 1889, the minor leagues took suit too. There was no blacks in the minor leagues, which all the way until Jackie Robinson signed with Montreal for the Dodger organization, there was no blacks in the minor leagues either.
Mm-hmm. Well, everything was so segregated then. I think we need to talk about the Negro Leagues, because there were Negro baseball leagues, and a tremendous amount of talent involved in those leagues.
Yeah, the interesting thing about the Negro Leagues is they had quite a following, and Rube Foster is really kind of considered in 1920, but there had been many attempts with a lot of these teams that would barnstorm and so forth. There was a lot of leagues that would pop up, and Rube Foster kind of organized them all the way up until and they kind of lasted up until Robinson came into being. And then once that started to happen, then you started to see the talent being extracted from the Negro Leagues to be put on major league rosters, and that really drained a lot of the talent from the Negro Leagues. But the Negro Leagues had some of the best ball players that you could imagine, and many of them in 2006 were elected to the into the Hall of Fame. And but the Negro Leagues they got to the point where they were prominent. You know, you had the Indianapolis Clowns, you had the Kansas City Monarchs, the New York Black Yankees. They played in many of the stadiums. They would play at Wrigley Field. They would play when the white teams were not playing there. They would play in Yankee Stadium, and they did a lot of traveling. They played as many as 200 games sometimes a year, traveling all over the country, and they were quite successful. Many Sundays they would draw in excess of 20,000, 25,000 to their games. They had a National League, they had American League, very similar to white baseball, and they even had an All-Star game. So it was a highly organized thing that it kind of once Jackie Robinson broke the barrier. Then they started suffering a lot, and then within a few years, there was only a couple teams that were left.
Mm-hmm. You know, I was thinking of a question to ask about that in regards to when they were popular, before integration in Major League Baseball occurred. They had so much talent. When the white teams weren't playing at the stadiums and the Negro Leagues were playing, did they draw? Obviously, they'd be very popular with Black Americans, but did they draw also like a major audience from white folks as well?
Yeah, they drew baseball fans in general, but they're predominantly black. But there were a number of white people that would go see these people. These people like Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson. I mean, these guys could play in anybody's era, and they were quite talented. World War II really kind of helped in that the overall black economy was now employed with a lot of the jobs due to the war, and so they had extra money to spend towards that. So the leagues were very powerful and very, very well organized by the time Jackie Robinson came on the scene.
Mm-hmm. I need to ask, which league actually adopted integration the fastest, had the best success with it?
You know, that is such an interesting part there, in that if you look at, of course the Dodgers were in the National League, but back when this happened, there were only 8 teams in each league, not like today, but there were 8 teams in the National League, 8 teams in the American League. And what you see is, during this period of time, is the National League very much so integrating the teams, in the fact that if you look at some of the stars in the teams, the Dodgers did quite well during the 50s. I mean, these were the boys of summer. They had some great guys. They had not only Jackie Robinson, but they had Roy Campanella, Don Newcomb, Joe Black, and a number of other guys that were stars on that team. And they won a number of championships, and they even won the World Series in '55. And so you see the National League. When you really look back at this, though, And Jackie, if you look at the MVP and the talent that comes through in the National League and how quickly they were adopted, and some of the ramifications that go along with this, in that if you look at the number of MVPs, in 1949, Jackie Robinson won the MVP. He was the first black to win the Most Valuable Player award, and he won it for the Brooklyn Dodgers. From 1949, when he won that, keep in mind he broke in 47, but in 1949 when he won that, from 1949 all the way through 1969, all but 5 years, a black won the Most Valuable Player award. And these are guys like Campanella won 3. You have Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, Ernie Banks, Maury Wills, Frank Robinson, Roberto Clemente, Cepeda, Bob Gibson, McCovey. Okay, during that same period of time, when 16 times the National League had a black of a total of 21 years, the American League only had 2, count them, 2 MVPs. And it took, their first MVP was not in 1947 like Jackie Robinson. Their first Most Valuable Player wasn't until 1963 with Alston Howard. Now, when you also look at some of the All-Star games, and especially keep in mind these guys are coming in the 50s, your Aarons and Ernie Banks and all these guys, they're all coming. But in 1960, these guys are stars.
Right.
From 1960 through 1969, there were actually 13 All-Star games because they played two games each year in 1960, 61, and 62. So there were 13 games, All-Star games played during that decade. Out of those 13 games, the American League won one. The National League trounced them all along, and that trend really started in the 50s too. You started seeing that there were actually 11 played there, of which the American League only won 4 then. So you saw the wealth of talent that started coming into the league with the National League. And but getting back to one of the things here when we talk about integration is that if you look at Jackie Robinson coming in 1947, everybody says, okay, wow, baseball, the color barrier is broken and everybody had a team. That wasn't the case. It wasn't until July of 1959 that all of baseball was integrated when a fellow named Pumpsie Green was the last guy, and this is the brother of Cornell Green, the great defensive back for the Dallas Cowboys. But Pumpsie Green was the last guy on the Boston Reds. He was the first black on the Boston Red Sox that finally made baseball all integrated with every team having a black.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, you went from 1947 to 1959. That's a long period of time, and a lot of people are disillusioned, thinking, "Oh wow, all the teams became immediately integrated." And that certainly wasn't the case.
Sure. We need to talk about a person somebody that I really hadn't even heard of until you and I began talking just a few weeks ago, and then watched the movie 42. But we need to talk about Branch Rickey.
Rich, and I want to say, you did a great job because I'd asked you to watch the movie, and you did. I really appreciate that because I think you really got that shows you really did your homework for the show. And the thing is talk about Branch Rickey, and Branch Rickey was an interesting thing. He is the reason baseball became integrated. One of the major reasons. He was the fellow that suggested that the Dodgers signed Jackie Robinson to a contract, and they bucked all the baseball to bring on Jackie Robinson and break the color barrier. Now, there had been an earlier attempt a few years earlier by another fellow named Bill Veeck, who basically tried to buy the Phillies because the Phillies weren't very good at the time, and he was going to load up the whole team with a lot of these black stars and sign them to contracts. But Kennesaw Mountain Landis, the commissioner, and this is the same commissioner that took over and banned the White Sox, the 8 men out during the 1919 World Series for throwing the World Series. He's still around at this time, but he dies in 1944. And that's what that did. That created an opportunity for a new commissioner, and the new commissioner had been the governor of Kentucky, and he was a U.S. senator at the time, and he left his position in 44 to take over for the deceased Landis. His name was Happy Chandler, and he felt like that if the blacks could fight for their country, they certainly could play Major League Baseball.
Absolutely. I wouldn't detract anything from Jackie Robinson, a true American hero. I mean, the guy was educated, and it wasn't just baseball that he was great at. He was great at just about any sport he went into. But in our conversations, it appears pretty obvious to me that if there had not been a Branch Rickey, there might not have been a Jackie Robinson.
Well, that's exactly right. Had there not been a Branch Rickey, someone willing to take on the system at the time, who knows how long it would have been, and who knows, let's imagine that all of a sudden it's 15, 18 years later. Now all of a sudden we don't see the Hank Aaron's, we don't see the Willie Mays', the Ernie Banks. These guys are all getting too old by this time, so maybe they don't bring those guys up. You don't see Satchel Paige come on, even though he's over 40 years old, and pitch for the Cleveland Indians. You don't see Larry Doby, another Hall of Famer, come up. He's the first black in the American League. You don't see him, and you don't see all these guys without Branch Rickey making and selecting Jackie Robinson. And then not to take anything away from Jackie Robinson. There's no way in the world. Right guy, right situation, tremendous talent, and highly educated. But Branch Rickey had to go out on the limb to create this situation.
If you're patient with me just for a couple of minutes, I've got a couple of quotes I'd like to read that are attributed to Branch.